Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report, and we're switching gears into wellness issues now. We've got Ron and Lumen Photon. Then we're going to talk about wellness issues, open lines for the next 45 minutes after Ron. Ron, you had some interesting stories. I had a real interesting consult first thing this morning. Gentleman in his 70s. He has a low GFR. I think he's got around 16% kidney function based on his glomerular filtration rate done by his nephrologist. He's on dialysis. And he wanted to know, he's heard a lot about stem cell therapy. And I tell people, there's a couple of things you got to do before you talk about stem cells. And I like the comment made by Dr. Steenblock about a year or so ago when he was on the program talking about stem cell therapy. His clinic's up in South Orange County. And the whole idea is that you got to prepare the ground. The first thing you got to do is remove the heavy metals, toxic chemicals. You got to improve the microcirculation. You got to make sure all the nutrients and deficiencies are fixed. And you got to make sure that they have probiotic bacteria in their gut. But then, and this is a big then, you have to have the right energetics. We're talking about Lumen Photon, number 1, Somal Pulse, number 2, or other pulse magnetic field therapies. Hyperbaric oxygen is tremendously helpful, especially if you augment it with a little extra oxygen that will feed into the compressor. Lumen Photon is the first thing I recommend. In fact, I told this lady, you need to get a Lumen machine for your husband, because if we can get him up to 20 to 25% renal function, he doesn't need dialysis. The problem with dialysis is it doesn't pull up middle ions, things like aluminum. So after a while, if you just do plain x-rays or a thin section coronal section CT scan, you'll actually see calcification of the pineal gland and the caudate and putamen nuclei, basal nuclei of the brain that regulate thermal regulation of temperature, thirst, hunger, and your release of other hormones like TSH for thyroid stimulating hormone, male-female hormone, adrenal controls, and so on, your autonomic nervous system. So the first thing I recommend is he needs to have a lumen. He'll start off with putting it on Nico setting several hours a day directly over his kidneys. We also know the research has shown it reduces C-reactive protein in people with chronic inflammatory kidney disease. And we know that hypertension starts from the kidney. It starts from two things, the kidney and the carotid body and the neck. That's where hypertension does. It doesn't start from the heart at all. The heart is actually just kind of a pump. It responds to external hormones from the adrenal glands. It responds to autonomic nervous system control. It responds primarily to the kidney. The kidney actually regulates, in a sense, to a great deal of hypertension. It responds to things like salt retention related to things like insulin resistance, which also sugar and salt are we call facilitated transport. So if your sugar's not going in, you'll build up salt in your body, which is why diuretics are helpful. But there's natural diuretics available too that are very good, like Power C+. It's one of the best ones out there. When we're using Lumen Photon therapy, this gentleman, after he cleans up all of his toxins, and I recommend they get a QRMA or functional medicine testing to find out what is in his body, because if you don't supply the nutrients you're missing, and that means especially for Lumen, in order to give him a response, you have to have proper zinc copper levels or your body won't respond. And those are necessary for making new DNA, RNA, for making connective tissue, for making elastin, and from just literally making new cells. If you don't have zinc metalloenzymes, you can't make new cells, i.e. stem cells. Pretty big deal, very important. So, Ron, tell us about Lumen Photon. This gentleman will, once we do his support protocol, then he'll be a candidate for perhaps taking the griseofulvin injections, which increases, it's a genetically engineered bone marrow stimulant for stem cells. But you may not need it. Lumen Photon and Somal Pulse will actually increase the stem cell numbers. And if we put it over the pelvis and over the bone stem cell generating areas of the pelvic bones, the hip bones, etc., where you're going to draw the bone marrow from, his stem cell population will increase dramatically. He may not need the drugs. And in fact, even without doing a stem cell transplant, we actually draw it out, put it through a centrifuge, spin it through flow cytometry, and take out the stem cells specifically, he may not need it. His body may start regenerating the organs just by putting the Lumen Photon over the areas and taking the right stimulants to try to make sure that the glands regenerate. Things like myco-D2 that contain ergothioneine that helps regenerate tissues. Silver 100 that stimulates stem cells, because ionic silver is a very powerful growth hormone stem cell stimulant. Most people aren't aware of that. It doesn't just kill pathogens, but ionic silver is a primary stimulant for stem cells. Very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when you give ionic silver, and by the way, in the non-ionic silver, which is, all the others, colloidal silver, nanoparticle silver, all the whiz-bang silvers out there, they're all such a tiny fraction is in the ionic state, they're virtually useless by comparison to silver 100 for stem cell support. So that's one story. Tell us about the other one you had with your heart failure, because that was kind of neat.
With the heart studies?
The heart failure guy, your gentleman that we talked about last time, and of course, his report.
Heart failure. This was a man in his mid 80s. I think maybe more closer to 88 than 85. But he was in a wheelchair with breathing apparatus all the time, and his wife had bought one, and they started using it. And the very next day after the first time that they'd used it, and they used it 2 times that day and then once the next morning, and he said immediately that his breathing was better than it had been in a long time. He couldn't remember exactly, but he could breathe much more easily.
Yeah. Let me explain the quantum physics of what Lumen is doing, okay?
Yeah.
What Lumen does is it injects energy from far and near infrared. That raises what's called the electron density of the cytochromes, which are the specific cytochrome-carrying protein molecules that carry electrons in the crystal gallery of the mitochondria, so that when you break down fatty acids or glucose in the Krebs cycle, you are creating movement of electrons from a higher energy state to a lower. In that process, you generate adenosine triphosphate and flavine adenine dinucleotide hydride, the 2 storage molecules. Those literally power the cell. 95% of the cell is aerobic. That process requires oxygen. For every glucose molecule, you generate 32 ATP when it's oxygenated properly, and when you only generate 2 if it's anaerobic, which means anaerobic cells like cancer cells are really very inefficient. And if you do anaerobic cell blockade with things like our malignant arrest, you literally starve those cells to death, the cancer cells. We also find that anaerobic cells are also autoimmune cells, parts of cells or tissues that are actually going anaerobic because the process of autoimmunity, which displays antigens on the surface of the cell that cause the body to attack it, is virtually identical in its early stages as cancer. Interesting. That's an interesting discovery 4 years ago. And no one else has published that, by the way, but autoimmune diseases have a degree of anaerobic metabolism that's tied to it, so there's abnormal talk between the mitochondria and the cells. Now, as soon as you add the lumen, you make the tissues immediately become alkaline. Immediately, like not delayed, like instantly. You make them start to improve microcirculation, so oxygen gets in there. The toxins start coming out of the tissue, so it's a major detoxifier of bisphenol A and all the thousands of other toxic chemicals and heavy metals. You start to stimulate stem cells, and because the talk between cells is light, you actually are amplifying, if you want to call it, the intracellular Wi-Fi network. So now you get a stronger signal between the cells, so the cells talk to each other and say, hey, nice to see you coming off the freeway of the blood supply through the capillary, exit number 151,480. Now that you're in the right side of the liver, we know that we want you to turn into a liver Kupffer cell. Okay? So that talk to that stem cell tells it what to start turning on specific genes, interacting with surrounding cells. And as I say, that's why, for example, the crosstalk tells your eye not to become the size of a dinner plate or a pea. The same way in your liver, if you've got good crosstalk, it's going to make or a kidney, it's going to make a new glomerulus, it's going to make a new nephron, it's going to make new the septae, they create the different, if you want to call it renal tubular, if you want to call segments that actually connect together to the renal pelvis. So every single one of the structural things is actually corrected and controlled by light. Your body is a light body. It's a plasma supercomputer, every cell. And when you increase light, you make it alkaline, you increase the informational transfer in tissues, you increase the microcirculation, you literally start to turn on genes that actually make the cells differentiate and talk to each other. So everything's better. It's almost like, it's just like everything that's positive to stimulate life is present when you use lumen photon. So that's how it works, basically, without getting too technical on the quantum physics energy transfer equations.
But basically, for people who are just using it, you don't have to know how it works.
No, what you know is let's put it instead of calling it far infrared light therapy, how about we call it far infrared life therapy?
Yeah.
How's that? And if they want more information, how do they contact you, Ron? It is 828-863-4834. And if you want a two-way call with Ron and me, just tell Ron what times are best, 2 or 3 time windows. We'll make a three-way call. You can call. Welcome back, and the number to call in 800-259-5791. One of my favorite movies of all time is Young Frankenstein, and I love the line in the movie that says, you put an abnormal brain in a monster? In other words, In other words, when I was trained back in internal medicine, family medicine, we were doing psychiatric rotations, etc. I was mainly interested in neurology. In fact, I was already booked and accepted to do a neurology PhD residency with Dr. Wallace Tortolot at the University of Calgary, Los Angeles, UCLA, VA hospital system in Los Angeles back in '78. I turned it down because one of the projects is to work on MS, which I wanted to do research on. The other 4 projects were to work with DARPA on directed energy weapons, directed mind control weapons by basically wet wiring the brains or using magnetronic helmets that are cooled by liquid nitrogen, which they had in the F-14 fighter cockpit they had mocked up in Dr. Tortolot's office, so they could actually do flight by thought, firing off ordnances with special symbols flashed on the canopy of the jet with eye blinks and other movements that would track the movement of the iris, etc. Now, people say, well, why didn't you proceed? I said, because I'm not a prostitute. I'm not going to use my knowledge and my abilities to make weapons of destruction or death. Now, one of the things we talked about beforehand was the issue of mental illness. And one of the gentlemen I did a consult on late last night, I do it all hours. I may take a break and relax during the weekend, but I was working last night till about 9 o'clock Pacific time on a consult for a gentleman who's diabetic and also schizophrenic. And I was looking at his QRMA test and his wellness history, and you have to look at it. The fact is that we know that a number of mental illnesses are basically bad chemistry in the brain. For example, when we look at autism, we know that the autistic child has abnormal organic acids because they get abnormal bacteria in their gut. And there's a very high incidence that these kids had tons of antibiotics, and if you look at the anaerobic bacteria, they're generating molecules that actually cross-react and cross the blood-brain barrier that screw up brain chemistry. We know that. That's why if you give antibiotics to children over and over and over again for otitis media or tonsillitis, you have a tremendously higher risk of those children becoming autistic. Whether it's Asperger syndrome, where they're high-functioning but asocial morons, but relatively high or very high IQs, or they're straight-form autistic, where basically they're disconnected with reality, but they may have an autistic super talent, like music or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
So we have a situation where you got abnormal brains. Now the problem is, you see, the psychiatry is in a sense a cult within medicine. It kind of is still Middle Ages, to be honest with you. And the neuropsychiatrists are kind of mutating out and realizing, hey, when we look at MRI scans and CTs and PET scans and positron emission tomography scans and quantitative EEGs, we start looking at genetics, and we can actually visualize these nuclei we kind of hypothesized before. They start to realize that their colleagues that are sticking things in the TR5 modified, they're nuts. The psychiatrists themselves are nuts because what they're doing is not logical. Logic is based on evidence, imaging, biochemistry, theory, and how it works. So, for example, one of the things I recommend for seizure disorders, depression, insomnia, schizophrenia is transcranial lumen photon therapy. Same thing with seizure disorders or stroke recovery. For example, we know that if we do stimulus, and we've done this with the Axon 2 scanner, and this was researched by Dr. Jim Hedgecock when he was doing work at the UC Irvine. If you do a proper stimulus to a periphery, there's neurons that light up in the brain and tell the brain, hey, you can send a signal down this pathway, and now you can move your left hand after that stroke. So when you start doing transcranial lumen photon therapy, you're stimulating the areas of the brain to start waking back up again. And whether you're trying to rebalance the brain, detoxify the brain, stimulate healing of neural pathways, whether you've got schizophrenia, insomnia, depression, manic depressive illness, there's an abnormal set of neural pathways, chemistry, and pathology that are going on in every illness. Whether it's nascent Parkinson's disease, Huntington's, chorea, multiple sclerosis, or Pick's disease, which is a specific local area of degeneration, or a stealth form of pathogen that you got when you're getting your measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, which is simian virus 40 that decided to reactivate when you're 70 years of age on your birthday, and decide to say, I'm going to take you down and make you drool for a few years before you die. Now, you don't need to do that. What you need to do is you need to realize the brain is an organ just like your liver and kidneys. And if you look at the brain that way, you realize the brain needs the proper phospholipids, fatty acids, you need to stop free radicals, you need to be able to bioconvert amino acids to neurotransmitters, you need to make sure there's proper microcirculation. You can't have Swiss cheese circulation where parts of the brain aren't perfused. from the circle of Willis, which is the arteries that are all tied together in a ring around the base of your brain, that if you have areas of microcirculation that are bad, and you can see that on a SPECT scan, you can see abnormal metabolism on a positron emission tomography scan, or abnormal neurological networks, both coherence patterns, which are based on Lexicor technology that was developed not only for the No Such Agency, NSA, but also the CIA and various PhD levels across the country. You can do a Lexicor scan, which is a quantitative EEG, and it can tell you very specifically which parts of the brain aren't working. You can even do home biofeedback to try to activate bilateral brain activity, frontal brain activity, etc. But I think lumen photon therapy would be very helpful in many of these so-called neurological or
I have a question for you there. There's no chance that any big study is going to be done in the United States. What about Canada? Would the Canadian medical staff be willing to do something with this, do you think?
I don't know. It's all depending on the funding. You see, what you have to do is get a group of organizations like the Stroke Foundation. Yeah. We have to kind of drag doctors into this, because what we have to do is get a group of people who says, look, hey, I'm Huntington's Foundation, or I'm the Stroke Recovery Foundation. I personally think everybody should be using transcranial somal pulse lumen photon and mild hyperbaric oxygen if they've had a stroke, any neurological condition, post-traumatic brain injury. Let's say they've been in the NFL for a number of years. If they were sent to me, or if they just called me and I said, Dr. Deagle, what tests would you do on them? I could spend a lot of money. And I've done these tests in the past. When I was doing testing, I'll give you an example. I'm going to use his initials as known. His name is JP. He was Polish. Real nice guy, but he got a very bad traumatic brain injury. And what happened is he was thrown out of his car and pinned underneath the other vehicle. When they pulled him out, he was unconscious. They eventually pulled him out of his coma. And I remember when his wife came into my office there, this is back in 2003. And she said the case manager said that she was talking to her boss, who was the senior person at Great West Life, that they were considering putting a contract out on me. And, you know, the contract is not to make me feel better or to do yard work. The contract out is to kill me, okay? So this is...
Yeah, I gathered that. That's what I heard.
Right. The contract is to make my day, make my day really bad, okay?
Right.
And because I wouldn't close this case, because I had already sent him to a neuropsychiatrist, I had... top guy at the university doing an evaluation of his brain. I'd done a SPECT scan, a positron emission scan, and I sent him to Lexicor for an advanced PhD level quantitative EEG, and proved beyond a shadow of a doubt this guy had a brain injury. Now, as soon as you saw a brain injury, all of a sudden it's like you go to Las Vegas and see all the balls drop, which means the insurance company says, oh my God, OMG, what the hell, Deagle's at it again. And I proved this guy had a brain injury, so they knew that if I was still involved in the case, that they're going to lose a lot of money. Shareholders are not going to have a happy day.
And you're a big man, that makes a big target.
Yeah, and I was in court sometimes 2 and 3 days a week, causing lots of havoc, going to federal, state court, military court, whatever. Yeah. And chewing through what I call stupid attorneys and cross-examination. Yeah. Real fun.
Well,
welcome back, and... So I'm trying to use this idea of lumen photon as an idea to explain why what I do and what we do at Nutrimedical completely unique from any other radio show on this network, any television show, any wellness experts, because we're using advanced technology like QRMA and bioplasma NLS, because we truly do use advanced medical testing, genetic and organic acid testing, which you can do, by the way, and order yourself at labtestingdirect.com, with the labs like McGuffey Labs, Great Plains Laboratory. We can direct you to doctors if you want one in your local area that belong to the same academies as me, the American College for Advancement in Medicine, the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, and the American Association of Anti-Aging Medicine, A4M. And the reason is that you want science-based, properly trained doctors dealing with knuckleheads that don't understand anything about toxicology, intermediate metabolism, stealth pathogens, immunotoxicology, is kind of a waste of your time, because they're going to ask you questions or do tests to justify the next medication they're going to give you. And probably 95% of drugs out there are not only dangerous, but if you give them longer than a short period of time, you're going to get other side effects you didn't want. For example, if you take beta blockers, number one, you're going to get impotence. You're going to damage calcium channels in your body. You're going to interfere with CoQ10 metabolism in your heart muscle and your arteries. So you can shove someone into heart failure. You're going to cross the blood-brain barrier and make people stupid, develop early signs of dementia, and you make them bald and fat because you're going to block their fat metabolism, their brown fat metabolism in the organs. That's just beta blockers. Give them calcium channel blockers, 5 years. You're going to get a significant, on MRI scan, shrinkage of the brain and a lowering of your IQ. Okay? That's just two different drugs. Now, there are safer drugs. For example, metformin, believe it or not, even in normal people, can actually lengthen your life because it stops a problem that's endemic in our entire society, which is insulin-stimulated liver overactivity, producing sugar through gluconeogenesis from amino acids and sugar and fatty acids. So you don't want that. So metformin actually is one that's relatively safe. Diuretics can be safe, but you got to watch your electrolytes, especially some of the ones that can interfere or interact adversely with other medications. For example, if you use a potassium-sparing diuretic like spironolactone, along with some ACE inhibitors, you can drive your potassium into orbit and get hyperkalemia, which is dangerous. You know, high potassium, and by the way, most people have low magnesium, so they can't protect themselves with high potassium from having adequate levels of magnesium because virtually the entire population are extremely magnesium depleted. If you're getting muscle cramps, if you got fatigue, if you got hypertension, you got a whole slew of things, about 100 lists long, you probably got magnesium in your boots. And unless you measure intracellular, we're talking about RBC magnesium, measuring serum magnesium is absolutely and totally useless because your body will rob from Peter to pay Paul to put it in your bloodstream. Because if your serum magnesium drops below 1.1 milligram per deciliter, and this is for you docs if you're taking notes, your heart's going to stop. Now, in 78, when I was actually a resident at the University of Calgary, and I was working in the emergency department, I was getting sick and tired of people that I resuscitate and they die on me. It pisses you off at 11 o'clock at night or 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning or 5 in the morning. And I was, they call me Dr. Wild Bill because I do stuff, like if I was there with a cardiac resident, we'd split someone's chest, I'd massage the heart right through their chest wall. And what I would do is I went and I found out the research literature because I was being insomniac, I'd read and found out magnesium levels are low. And they did studies at the Texas Heart Institute at Texas A&M University where they did heart ligation studies. And just like you say, Ron, if you don't have adequate levels of minerals, especially things like zinc, copper, lumen photon doesn't work. So if you don't have adequate levels of magnesium, a whole lot of stuff doesn't work. You can't make glutathione peroxidase. You can't do all kinds of stuff. Sugar metabolism's off. You get hypertension. You get muscle cramps. It's really, the major calcium channel blocker is just magnesium. If you've got adequate magnesium levels in your red blood cells and in your tissues, you don't need a calcium channel blocker. You need a calcium channel blocker because you don't have adequate magnesium. Because that's what the calcium channel blocker is. It's magnesium, period. And if you damage your ion channels, you have to adequate levels of gamma-E tocopherol and the other tocotrienols. And if you don't, you can't repair your ion channels. And the more you take calcium channel blockers, the more you, quote, damage those ion channels. Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Now, the average doctors that don't know this stuff, they're dangerous. So it's like taking somebody out that goes hunting and doesn't realize that when someone has a bright colored jacket on, they're not a deer. Okay, they're not a deer. You don't shoot at the other person because they have a bright colored jacket. Deers don't wear bright colored jackets with fluorescent tabs on them, okay?
Yeah.
So that's what's going on. Now, people say, well, Dr. Deagle, you're not really socially very nice. You got the social skills of a bull in the china shop. I said, too bad. So sad. If you don't like it, don't swing on my door. Turn off the radio if you don't like what I'm saying. All I want you to do is please don't believe anything I say. If you don't believe it and they want me to send you literature, I will. If you're a doctor, if you're a person that thinks you know more than me, prove it. If you don't agree with what I say, make the specific statement of why and which specific words I say you don't believe, whether it's spiritual, biochemical, geopolitical, or otherwise. And I'm not an absolute authority on anything. But I can tell you I'm a lot closer than probably most of the people in the world about what I talk about. And the things I don't talk about, I'm not expert in. But I'll research it. Like my father used to say, if I know what you know, what I know, I'll know more than you. So when I bring on an expert, whether it's finances or IRS, whatever, or specific law, like Jonathan E. Moore and his legal group about the laws related to smart meters, I'm going to research a topic to the nth level. And when I bring on a guest, if they say something bad or stupid, I'm going to ask them politely a pile of questions. And if it looks like they're saying something really dangerous to the public, it's not going to be pleasant. Now, I don't know what you expect from a host on the show, but I don't host it the way most people do. I'm not a nice host. I'm a pleasant host, but I care most about the public that are listening, not the people that are being interviewed. People being interviewed are if they manage to get re-interviewed on my show, it means they're real good. Because if they come on once or twice and it looks like they do something that's really, really stupid or dangerous, they never get back on. So if you see people disappear, you say, I wonder why they're gone. Well, they're gone because they did something that was bad or unethical or just plain stupid. Okay? And you'll hear it on the show. So, I tell people, if you want to hear the truth, that's why our program is also part of the continuing education for adults, but also it's homeschooling for a lot of kids across the country that want to actually have a brain when they finish high school at home, not the so-called pseudo-education they get in public school with core education that turns them into automatons, so they'll integrate into a stupid healthcare system, a stupid geopolitical system that tells them lies, and they believe it because they're told, don't think it's going to hurt. Don't think it'll hurt. That's funny but true. If you think it's gonna be a big hurt, it'll hurt you bad. It's like, come on, it's not gonna hurt. It'll hurt because they got a big stick to hit you if you think that's what it is. My gosh!
From the very beginning, this was the answer to a prayer. I've said this many, many times, but it's one of those when we knew that this was the answer. We have never deviated from this is the truth. Let's take it as far as we can go, and be honest as far as we can go all the way. And there's no nonsense about it. It works or it doesn't work. And if that doesn't work, then like we're talking about deficiency in copper, zinc, magnesium, somewhere in that range, that's usually what it is. So.
Yeah, and of course we look at lots of different nutraceuticals, and we've got anti-H Max, which is the dimethyl resveratrol, and that stops things like prevents oxidative stress in the artery and monocyte accumulation, which turns into macrophage or big eater cells that die and become foam cells. We stop cardiac enlargement, EKG abnormalities, and things like that. I mean, this freaks out cardiologists, because if you give people adequate levels of magnesium and they actually test to see it's there, if you give them adequate levels of CoQ10 ubiquinol, and forms of carnitine to increase cardiac metabolism, if you energize their heart with lumen photon therapy, all of a sudden they say, oh my gosh, the bisphenol A and the toxic heavy metals are coming out of their body, and their heart muscle saying, hey, I can contract again. Look at that. Maybe they got obstructive sleep apnea, and their doctor was so knuckleheaded they never did an overnight sleep study at home. It was abnormal. They never did a full lab study to find out they're hypoxic, and they're going to right-sided heart failure because they're suffocating, and their pulmonary artery pressure is going into orbit, which you can test if you did an echocardiogram. But they didn't test it, so they don't know. Guess what? I'm going to tell you, based on your history, what you need to get done at no charge. Because this is not an office, I'm just providing you information. Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report, and we'll just complete this hour, and then we're going to be joined with John Moore talking about wellness. Just to give you an idea, I'll be posting out a newsletter probably tonight, and we'll give you an idea of the guests this week. We have Michael Connolly from the U.S. Justice Foundation, constitutional attorney filing to protect veterans' rights, talking about the articles of impeachment against the Abominator. I mean, Obama's even so nervy he actually is telling people in Congress, sue me if you don't like what I say. He's a bad puppet, but he's an evil puppet. The only thing he won't be late for is the Situation Room on Tuesday when they're going to do drone attacks and kill people. And the secondary strike is to kill the EMTs that try to pull the bodies and body parts that are bleeding out of the wreckage of the Stinger missile strikes, etc. Or late for golf, which of course Obama loves golf. Or you like going behind the White House and pretending he's an NBA basketball star and he's going to fire baskets. So that's not a good situation. We don't really have a real president that's actually got the competency to be a president, which is a manager of the corporation called America. And we don't have someone who actually has a compassion enough for the American future to realize that he's actually doing things that will end up resulting in the breakup of America, the bankruptcy of America, and to turning America into a surveillance state with the militarization of our police, the banking structures basically that make us enemies of other countries rather than collaborating with them so we can have a true, strong international order of nations that are strong rather than a New World Order that can come together to have a financial system that makes sense, like a new revised version of Bretton Woods. So let's talk about this. We have, some advanced nutraceuticals, and I just want to go over some of my latest consult requests that I had, and some of these are pretty. People make really good questions. I mean, I'm amazed at the kind of questions that people propose that they want me to answer, And I did for example, recently did a QRMA on a gentleman who has both diabetes and schizophrenia. And of course, we're trying to see if we can correct people's problems like that. We also tell people that if you've had problems and you're doing your QRMAs, we have one gentleman, we'll just call his first initial of his first name is J. He's done remarkably well. I just reviewed his latest QRMA, and he's dramatically reduced the total number of nutraceuticals he needs. His protocols are tightening up. He's showing health. Some areas are still persisting, problems with insulin resistance, problems with most of the deficiencies are gone. Dysbiosis is still an issue in digestive enzymes, but otherwise, I would say 2/3 of his problems are settled because we can focus in on his wellness medical history and his QRMA, and it helps dramatically. We have people, too, also with all kinds of dental implant problems. It's amazing how many questions I've dealt with recently. I tell people there are tests that can be done to look for dental implant or materials intolerance. Those can be done with functional medicine, functional dentists that actually belong to the holistic dental associations. And if you can look at that, you want to make certain you don't go to regular dentists, you go to a holistic dentist. Never replace an amalgam with either the amalgams that are hardened by ultraviolet light. Always use porcelain. Even though it's more expensive, it's far better to use porcelain than to use the toxic stuff with 2,000 parts per million fluoride. And the VA should immediately stop and start replacing all those dental amalgams, because all those people that are already are veterans are going to get disability 5, 10, 20 years from now due to the dental toxicity of those mercury amalgams moving out to their bone marrow, their brain, their liver, their other organs, causing everything from diabetes and hypertension to dementia and heart failure. So not a good thing. And we have people, too, in distant countries like New Zealand that think, well, can you answer my questions? Of course. It doesn't matter if you're in New Zealand or South Africa or China. We'll answer your questions if you can speak English, because I don't speak Cantonese. And I'll try to give you protocols. We can even recommend the kind of professionals you can find in your country. They can do many of the tests we recommend. Some countries are much more open. For example, 80% of the hyperbaric chambers in the world are in China because they use it all the time for everything from many, many more conditions than we do here in North America or the West. Europeans are far more advanced in terms of hyperbaric oxygen. Pulsed magnetic field therapy, for example, my first machine I got 34 years ago when I was one of the team doctors for the Calgary Flames, who also owned a computer company that was making software. We were doing some designs work on software for medical offices. I was involved with help doing that 34 years ago in Calgary, Alberta, when I was working there in Canada. And the pulse magnetic field machine I had was from the Netherlands. So the Europeans are way more advanced in many areas of nutraceutical research, unfortunately pharmaceutical too. And these pharmaceuticals are extremely toxic, many of them, and of course they're often Me Too drugs where they had new side groups so they can extend the patent. We have a lot of people. I had a lady this morning who called me that she had been told by her rheumatologist that she had ankylosing spondylitis because she's in her early 30s and not overweight. She had some pretty heavy activity when she was younger as a cheerleader, and thought that she had the HLA haplotypes that are predisposing to ankylosing spondylitis, sacroiliitis. What you have to do first is you've got to clean up the bowel, turn off the cytokine levels that are related to elevated blood insulin. We call it Raven syndrome or Syndrome X, which we use leptin metabolic, tendon bender joint performance, and Inflamex, collagen max, and mountain red velvet. When you start correcting it too with anti-inflammatory therapy like lumen photon and somopulse, when you get things like vibrational platform therapy that can improve proprioception and muscle balance around the pelvis, because often muscle imbalances will precipitate joint inflammation. When you reduce the cytokine levels with natural topicals such as curcumin and Magnus Smooth, you don't need to resort to non-steroidals, which are bad, and definitely not narcotics or fentanyl patches. These are all dangerous and stupid. And unfortunately, because they don't fix the problem, they tend to cover it up. They like spraying black paint over the flashing red dashboard light. And I've seen it firsthand. And if you map people's pain out, you can see their pain generators, which are mapping out the C fibers and A delta fibers that regulate pain. I'll tell you exactly where the pain is generating. And muscle imbalances, deep tissue massage is helpful. Vibrational platform exercises are helpful. Nerve glide exercises, yoga is very helpful. And of course, it's very important that you take enzymes to break up the scar tissue. That's why Inflamex actually will break up the scar tissue interfascial planes. when we look at things like trying to correct methylation pathways, and we were having our company supplier had problems from January through to just recently, and now that problem's been totally fixed with Samethyl. We have people with depression. We recommend Calm Mind, BH4 Biopterin, Minerals Plus, which contains a special form of lithium orotate, manganese and other important minerals for brain bioconversion, and molybdenum, which is extremely important for the tryptase and paralase enzymes that make your amino acids turn into neurotransmitters. And, of course, we have Samethyl, which is the lemon-flavored crystals in a nitrogen sachet. You put them in the inside of your Molson, and it immediately increases methylation because these pathways help convert amino acids into your brain neurotransmitters, myelinate the brain nerve fiber tracts, and to create digestive enzymes and many other properties, including detoxification in your liver. One of the main pathways is methylation in your liver. So if there's deficiencies, your levels of B12 and folic acid will be low, your digestive enzymes will be low. Whenever I see on a QRMA test people have marginal levels of enzymes, usually it means they've got a methylation pathway disorder. They're also prone to uric acid elevation, so part of our treatment for high uric acid is bio-LVR, superfolate pyromethyl B12, and Samethyl. It also your body will make more BH4 biopterin or tetrahydrobiopterin, which is helpful for your blood vessel walls and for your brain. Because a lot of these pathways have got multiple effects. In other words, if you're BH4 biopterin deficient, you're going to be prone to hypertension. You'll be prone also to depression and psychiatric problems. So it's interesting how they kind of tie together. If you get selenium deficiency, you're more prone to cell phone damage to the cell phones as well as radiation injury. And your glutathione peroxidase, you're exposed to a toxic anesthetic that can cause a cardiac arrhythmia. The anesthetic is more likely to cause damage if you're selenium deficient. And a lot of drugs will actually create mineral vitamin deficiencies that your doctor will not tell you because they don't know. And they don't research it, and they don't have any clue whatsoever because they have no idea what the starting point was because they never tested. And if you don't test, you don't know. So if they don't read and they don't test, they're just going to slap another drug on you and spin the wheel and hope that you're going to get better, which is usually not the case. You just develop new symptoms of a new problem, and they have no idea how it happened. Hour 3 coming up with John Moore, and we're going to talk about preparedness as well as world events. If you have any questions on that specific topics, on world events, preparedness, do call in Hour 3, 800-259-5791. Tomorrow we have Michael Connolly, attorney from U.S. Justice Foundation. Coming up on Thursday, Deborah Tavares, major update on what's going on in Agenda 21 and many other things. It's going to be a special report. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be wildfire. And special guests coming up on Wednesday. And, of course, get your questions ready for Friday Firing Line.